Hello, everyone. Philip Lay returning with another episode of Civil War Chat. Today is Tuesday, the 6th of December, 2022. Click on the subscribe button down here in the lower right to subscribe to future episodes, and also the notification bell in the far upper right. YouTube requires you to do that in order to be notified when new episodes are released. That's the way they do it. I don't understand probably any more than you do why they do that. In fact, jumping through these hoops actually may do nothing, but we just don't know what's going on at YouTube. So what I want to talk to you about today is, well, okay, let's talk about reparations, all right? But before I get into that, I want to show you my book, U.S. Grant's Failed Presidency. It's $22 at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, other fine bookstores, $26 from me with an autograph, and I'll cover the postage to you if you're here in the United States. Just email me, Phil, Phil _Lee, Leigh, at me.com. Now, I'm going to, in this episode, I'm going to discuss some things about Reconstruction that, this covers that you don't normally find. And I think actually, if you stick with this video, many of you are going to find you don't know anything. You didn't know anything about this, but not because you're ignorant or stupid. It's because the academics don't teach it. It doesn't fit their agenda. But what I'm going to give you is facts, and you'll be able to see that once we get started. Okay, let's talk reparations. California Governor Gavin Newsom remarked last week his state's progress toward providing reparations for Blacks who can trace their ancestry to slaves or to any free Black that lived in America during the 19th century. Newsom's task force has identified 5 victim classes supposedly requiring reparations. The biggest single category is composed of descendants of Blacks who were victims of housing discrimination from 1933 to 1977. The total reparations slated for all 5 categories is $570 billion. It is to be distributed among 2.6 million Blacks for an average award of $220,000 each. By comparison, California's entire state government budget is $515 billion. So we got reparations of $570 billion, California's entire annual budget at $515 billion. Every Black that qualifies will get $220,000 in cash if this proposal goes through. It will be formally submitted, I think, next July of 2023. Now, there are plenty of arguments to make against such reparations. For example, Blacks disproportionately benefited from subsidized government housing during the last 70 years. So during much of that period, when they complained of, unfair housing or discriminatory housing, they were amongst the racial groups that benefited the most, disproportionate to their population, from government subsidized housing, particularly in the big cities, not in the rural areas. In fact, they still do disproportionately benefit from government subsidized housing relative to their 13 or 14% share of the USA population. Now, few people, however, know that the former Confederate soldier and his descendants have already paid a form of reparations, if not for slavery, then for losing the war between the states. Here are the facts. For 25 years after the end of the war, a combination of 3 line items accounted for over half of the federal budget. 1, interest payments on the federal war debt. 2, budget surpluses used to retire Civil War debt. And 3, Union veterans pensions. None of the 3 categories I mentioned here benefited former Confederate soldiers and or their descendants. None of those things. During the first 25 postbellum years, Union veterans pensions amounted to 12% of the federal budget, whereas the combination of budget surpluses to retire the war debt and the interest on the war debt, those two in combination counted for 40%. So 40% plus 12 makes 52%. Over half of the money did not benefit any Confederate veteran or his descendants at all. Ultimately, however, Union veterans pensions became the larger and more protracted factor. In 1893 alone, Union veterans pensions represented over 40% of the federal budget. The annual disbursements for pension checks to the recipients did not stop growing until 1921, which was 56 years after the war had ended. The postbellum Republican Party could not resist the temptation to bribe veterans into supporting high tariffs by arguing that tariffs were the chief funding source for the pensions. Such tariffs were beneficial to the northern industrial states, but injurious to the South's export economy. Today's Democrat Party likewise cannot resist the temptation to bribe key constituencies such as youthful and Black voters with student loan forgiveness and reparations. After Democrat Samuel Tilden almost won the presidency in 1876, he actually had a popular vote majority that year. But unlike Hillary, he didn't get hysterical about it. And that's why you're not taught about it. So anyway, after Democrat Samuel Tilden almost won the presidency in 1876, the Republicans started liberalizing the pensions to strengthen their voter constituency. They knew that the veterans, members of the Grand Army of the Republic, if they gave them good veterans pensions, they would vote Republican. So that happened in 1879. So 3 years after Rutherford Hayes, the opponent of Samuel Tilden, was elected president, Hayes and his Republican Congress passed the 1879 Arrears Act, which enabled new applicants to collect pensions in arrears back to the date of their military discharge, as opposed to the date when the veteran applied for benefits. Now, prior to this act, he could start collecting benefits after he applied for benefits, and this is 1879. But the 1879 Act empowered him in the same application to collect all of the preceding 15 years or so of benefits that he would have received if he had applied earlier. This is an important thing. This really changes the amount of money that goes to these soldiers. The average arrearage was $1,000, which compared to the average American worker's annual income of $400. 2.5 times the annual worker's income. Just by filing that paper, he would get a bonus of 2.5 times what the average worker in America earned during the year. Now, when editorializing about the act, one New York City magazine editor wrote, quote, "The effect of this law is to stir up a multitude of people to apply for pensions. People who had not realized that they were disabled until the government offered them $1,000 to remember, $1,000 or more," close quote. In 1890, the 1890 Dependents Amendment to this act, the original act was 1862 for Union veterans pensions. So this 1890 was an amendment to it, greatly liberalized the dependency qualifications for the pensions. Now, this was passed during Republican Benjamin Harrison's presidency, and it was deliberately targeted at eliminating years of budget surpluses in order to eradicate the Southern case for lowering tariffs. Southerners had argued for years, let's lower tariffs. We've got budget surpluses year after year. Let's lower tariffs as a way to, absorb those surpluses and enable our economy, particularly those of us that are exporting our products, to benefit. That would include not just Southerners, but increasingly some Midwesterners. Well, the Republican politicians didn't like that, so they just bribed the Grand Army of the Republic and other Union veterans with bigger pensions. And the 1890 Dependents Amendment to this act vastly increased the number of people that would be qualified for the pensions. And then in 1904, 14 years later, President Theodore Roosevelt transformed the pensions into an old age retirement program instead of a disabilities platform by declaring all Union veterans at age 62 and over to be disabled. You see, the act was originally intended to compensate wounded warriors, not old soldiers. The 1862 Act was to compensate men who had been wounded in battle and disabled either partly or completely by the wounds. That's what it was for. But they continually liberalized it until in 1904, President Roosevelt said, if you're 62 or over, you are disabled, therefore you get the pension. By 1917, $5 billion had been spent on Union veterans pensions, an amount twice as large as all of the federal and state expenditures made to fight the Civil War during the war. By 1942, such spending aggregated $8 billion. The last monthly payment check for a Union veteran's pension was made in May of 2020. Confederate soldiers got none of this money. Confederate soldiers and their descendants had to pay their share to fund of taxes to fund these payments. So if we're going to talk about reparations, let's bring this out on the table. When was the last time you heard the descendants of Confederate soldiers complaining about not, having to pay reparations and the injustice of it, or asking for a rebate on this sort of thing? I would dare say most of you have never heard of this, but I could be wrong. And if those of you that do know of it, then you know what I'm saying is true. And if you know more about it, then feel free to make your comments below here, and I'll post them up. Okay, that's our show for today. Again, yet U.S. grants failed presidency to learn about this kind of stuff. $22 at Amazon. Philip Lee, Leigh, is the author. And I look forward to seeing you next time. Thank you.